Okay, so our application data is coming through as we'd expect, and right now it's just kind of all listed out like this on the screen. There's not really any kind of application look and feel yet, so that's what we're going to take care of in this video. What we want to do is get this to be looking like a real application, and so that would include things like putting a nav bar up here at the top, and also taking care of the display of this data in a different way. Instead of just a list like this, what we actually want is to have everything be displayed in a series of cards. So each of these properties would get its own card, its own rectangular area to display all of the data for that property. And we might have something like 3 across, and then a new row would start below. So let's take care of putting all of this in. I think the first thing that we should do is put a nav bar up here at the top. So let's go over to our editor, and in our app.component.html file, we can include a nav bar. And Bootstrap comes with some classes that give us a nice nav bar, and we can make use of those. So let's put in a nav element, and we'll give it a class of nav bar, and then also nav bar default. And then within here, let's put a fluid container. So I'll do a div with a class of container fluid. And by the way, you'll notice here that I'm just using a shortcut that comes with VS Code. Basically, I can just type the name of an element that I want, followed by a dot, and then the name of the class that I want. And then I can just hit tab to have that element be created. Okay, so within the container, let's put in the brand area. So we'll have an anchor tag, and it's got a class of nav bar brand. And then within here, let's just put ng2 cribs. So this would kind of be the standard logo area at the top left of any application you might see, and this will just give us a basic nav bar. So let's save that and check it out now. Okay, cool, so there it is. The next thing we should do is get everything into kind of a container area here in the middle of the screen. Right now, everything is justified all the way to the left here, but that's not really what we want either. So why don't we go over and put a container around that area where our data is to be displayed. So back over here, we can just do a div with a class of container, and then we just have to move our crib listing component into that container. Okay, cool. So now let's get ready to put in the cards. And each of these listings is going to have an associated image with it. So if we go and look at our data, what we see is that each of our properties within our list has an image. And so we've just named them very simply here, crib 1, 2, and so on. And so we need some images to line up with these names. And over here in the repository for this course, I've got a set of images all ready to go. And so you just have to go to the assets images directory, and you'll see we've got all of the crib images there. We've also got this default crib image as well, and that will come in handy later when we go to add new listings in. So if you want to get these images, feel free to clone the repo or download it as a zip file and just pull out these images and then add them to a folder within the source assets images directory. And I've already pulled these down in my own project, so within my assets images directory, I've got all of the crib images. Okay, so let's go over to the crib listing component HTML again, and this is where we'll want to change things up so that everything displays as a card. Okay, so the very first thing that we might want to do is provide a class to our div here that's going to tell it how wide it should be or how many column spaces it should take up. And so we've got classes that come from Bootstrap to help with this, and one of them is call small 4. And that's going to tell this div that it should take up 1/3 of the total 12 column spaces across our page. So over in the application, what we see is everything is lined up in a row of 3. So the first one takes up 1/3 of the available space, and then the second one takes the second third, and so on, and then they break into a new row. So this will be the first step in getting to our cards. Now what we can do is use some other Bootstrap classes to have everything display more nicely. So now what we can do is we can wrap all of the data within these cards in a class of thumbnail. So thumbnail comes from Bootstrap, and that's going to give us a nice kind of bordered display around each of the cards. So let's check this out now in the browser. All right, cool. So there's all of our borders. Now why don't we put in the images for each of the cards? So here we'll say we want an image tag, and we'll want to take the image name that we have within our data. So if you remember over here in our data, we've got this image key, and we've got this name for an image that we should be using, and those map to these images here within our assets folder. So we can take this image key and use the value of it to populate an image here within our component. So as the source, we'll say that we want to go to assets, images, and then we want to template out the name of that image. So this is going to be crib.image. And then we'll say it's a JPG file. All right, cool. So all of the images are showing up as we'd expect. Next, what we should do is clean up the area below the images and make that look nicer. And so what we can do here is let's remove everything that we've got below the image for now. And what I'm going to do is just paste in a big set of HTML that's going to be used for this part. So instead of me typing all of this out, I'll give you the chance to pause and copy all of this out. You can do that from here, or you can go to the repository and just get the final HTML from there. Now what you'll see is that I've got a couple conditions here within the HTML. So I'm using the ngIf directive. This directive is used to conditionally hide and show various elements. I'm using this directive to say that if our show details property, which is a new property that we're creating here on our crib data, if this property is not true, then we want to show this area. And if it is true, then we want to show this area down here. And so it's a bit tricky to imagine how this works out just by looking at the HTML. So let's save and let's come over to the browser and take a look at what's actually going on, and then we'll review. So what we've got here is we've got some labels, we've got some icons happening besides some of our text, and then we've got this details button. And when I click the details button, then our show details property is going to be set to true, and the area that is displayed here is going to be hidden, and this area that wasn't displayed before is going to be shown. So let's go over again and see how that kind of works out. So when I click that show details button, which is right here, details is the name of the button, I'm going to use a click event. Click events are triggered by the parentheses and passing in an event name. In this case, it's click. That's going to say that we want the show details property of our current crib listing. We want that to equal whatever it wasn't before. So this is kind of a toggle. What's happening here is that we're saying if crib.showDetails was true, then set it to whatever it wasn't, which would be false, and then vice versa. If it was false, set it to true. And we are conditionally showing this button based on the value of that show details property. And similarly, over here, this is another area of the card that is going to be conditionally hidden or shown depending on the value of that property. And we've got a close button as well. It's got a click event that is going to do the same thing. It's going to take that property, show details. If it was true, it'll set it to false, and if it was false, it will set it to true. So essentially what we're doing with that is we are toggling on and off this different area within our card. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll give you a chance to copy out all of this HTML by pausing, or once again going over to the repository. Some other things to note here are that we're using the currency pipe. So this is another pipe that comes from Angular 2. We've already seen the JSON pipe, which formats an area as JSON. We've also got this currency pipe, and it takes an argument of whatever currency you want to use. And then the second argument here is whether or not we want to show the $sign. So right now we've got a $sign beside the price. If we set this to false, what's going to happen is it's just going to show the local currency ahead of that price value. So right here we see USD, but if we set this to true, we're going to get the $sign instead. Okay, so just take a minute to digest everything that's happening here within the HTML. We're conditionally hiding and showing various parts of the card depending on whether or not this show details property is set to true or false. And that gives us the ability to toggle this area on and off. We've got this details area that we can click on, and it gives us our description, and then we can close it, and we have the front matter for the card, which is just the price and the address. One thing that we can do here is add a little bit of CSS to clean things up. So right now these labels have no space in between them, and if we display those as inline block instead, we'll get them to display more nicely. And the other thing right now is that the height of the card is variable depending on the amount of content that is being displayed. But what we should do is make this a fixed height for now so that we don't have any kind of weird behavior happening depending on the positions of our cards and how much height they take up. So let's fix that over in our HTML. So over in our CSS, what we can do is we can say that we want our thumbnail classes to have a min height of maybe 380 pixels. And then we can give our label classes a display of inline block. So now what we see is if we click details, we've got a better height for our card and our labels are displaying as they should be. Okay, so that takes care of the display for all of our listings. In the next video, what we'll do is move all of this over to a separate component, and we'll talk about components that are used for display purposes.